Hello, and welcome back to my course, Worldview Studies. So, let me share again my PPT here. And as you all know, this is a UNESCO UNITWIN online course supported by Handong Global University and the Ministry of Education, South Korea. So, let me move on to the eighth lecture, that is postmodernism. Postmodernism is a very special worldview these days. So let me give you an introduction. Postmodernism can be regarded, excuse me, as a worldview that has emerged as an alternative to modernism after the illusion of modernism was generally deconstructed. Then what is modernism? I have explained in the previous lecture, but basically modernism is a rationalistic worldview centered on human reason that started after the Middle Ages. It's a humanistic worldview that was established on the strong confidence in human autonomy and ability based on the astonishing development of science together with the optimistic prospect on the remarkable development of applied technology and capitalism. So, what about the background of this worldview? However, this modernism was no longer persuasive as it entered the early 20th century because, as you know, the tragic and terrible events such as the two world wars and the Great Depression, Holocaust, the nuclear bomb, the communist revolution, and so on, continued to break out. And therefore, absolute confidence in human autonomy is changed into anxiety. That confidence is now lost. Therefore, after this, giving up on the modernistic ideology while holding on to the basic idea of humanism, this postmodernism emerged as the worldview after modernism. And this includes diverse and skeptical interpretations of culture, art, philosophy, history, economics, architecture, novels, and literary criticism. So, what about contemporary postmodernism? First of all, this postmodernism states that one cannot clearly answer to the question, who am I? It is because it believes that I is socially structured. In other words, the various elements that have influenced oneself, such as the language, region, family, education, and government, constitute the current self. Therefore, it claims that people are social constructs. Furthermore, this worldview tends to criticize the origin of Western knowledge and justice, and the laws of Western Christianity and the Enlightenment, which are regarded to be based on white men. Therefore, this worldview deliberately removes religious roots and transcendental dimensions by emphasizing more fragmented and subjective morality rather than objective morality. And postmodernists, therefore, have a special interest for those who have been alienated and ignored, especially the poor and the oppressed. For instance, they try to help weak women and sexual minorities in the name of justice. The influence of postmodernism is evident in the recognition of truth and morality. So, according to George Barna, 72% of Americans think that there is no absolute truth, and two persons can have totally different view of truth, and both can be right. Furthermore, 71% of them say that there's no absolute standard which can be applied to all people in every situation. Even 53 of them say that they are born again Christians. Thus, postmodernism can be seen as a mainstream worldview in the 20th century America. Now you can see these two pictures quite contrasting each other. Well, the typical architecture of modernism is the Bauhaus in Germany. It's a very rationalistic and practical building because it is standardized and highly efficient. However, as criticism of the modernist worldview arose, postmodern architecture emerged. As an example of this is the Waldspiral apartment. Waldspiral means the spiral of the forest in English, which is located in Darmstadt, Germany. It is designed by the Austrian architect Wasser. As you can see, this building has almost no aspects which are identical. So, you see, these two are radically different. Now, what are then the contents of postmodernism? First, when you look at the contents of postmodernism, first, it claims atheism as to what is the genuine prime reality. However, the motive to deny the existence of God is different. It is not because there is no scientific evidence, but because God cannot be believed in. And it also calls for deconstruction of all traditional assumptions by asking critical questions about the language's ability to represent reality. In literature, a text does not have only a certain meaning, and the reader argues that it should be approached by actively eliminating its metaphysical or ethnocentric assumptions. Second, postmodernism has a very vague view on what is the external reality. In other words, the essence of the world around us. And this worldview holds that reality is ultimately inaccessible to human inquiry. In addition, it views that knowledge is one of the social constructs in which the claims about truth are nothing more than political manipulations. It also sees the meaning of words as decided by readers rather than authors. In other words, reality is created by individuals or social groups. And in this sense, postmodernism can be called anti realism. And it also denies universal truth. Thirdly, humans focus more on irrationality rather than rationality in postmodernism. Because modern society has focused on rational thinking, postmodernism is more concerned with human desires, stimuli, and feelings. In other words, it seeks non rationalism. Furthermore, it denies generalization and insists on pluralism of interpretation and focuses more on individual specialties. And it pursues ambiguity rather than clarity, heterogeneity rather than homogeneity, and diversity rather than uniformity. Postmodernism also tries to escape human centrism. Modern society is human centered, but postmodernism emphasizes the rights of nature and criticizes those who see nature as merely an object of research and development. Fourthly, postmodernism is also very critical of the basis on which humans can have knowledge. For example, in the case of science, it rejects the conventional evolutionary theory as a meta-narrative and emphasizes coincidence and discontinuity. In the case of politics, modern people think that politics is very rational and that history is always progressing. But these arguments are abandoned. Postmodernists see politics as a potentially composed desire. And therefore, postmodernism emphasizes depoliticization and unhistoricization. In other words, they see knowledge as fragmented and that it does not exist as one whole system. Fifth, about ethics. Ethics in postmodernism are thoroughly relativistic. More precisely speaking, it is so-called cultural relativism. Ethics does not come by any absolute rule, but by human needs. Just as philosophical truths about reality are not determined by the local community, it's the same with the moral truth about how we should act. As I mentioned earlier, the grand narrative or meta narrative does not exist anymore. So I think each community develops micro narratives to meet their own needs. Finally, about human history, Postmodernists believe that historical facts are unapproachable to us. Therefore, they argue that historians only reconstruct what has happened in the past by their own imagination or ideological orientation. Postmodernists state that history is more of a fiction than a result of an objective and scientific process. Because they emphasize subjectivity, they emphasize historicism, which implies that all historical issues should be resolved in a cultural and social context. As for the representative postmodernists, let me explain. First of all, the French thinker Jean-François Lyotard. He criticized modernism and states that the term postmodern rejects such a meta-narrative as modernism. This meta-narrative stands for the worldview which claims that through the advancement of history and scientific progressions, mankind is able to know about everything and about the possibility of absolute freedom. And he further stated that such a meta-narrative, or in French, because he speaks French, grand récit, grand story, is no longer neither suitable nor possible. And therefore, mankind must now sensitively recognize the dissimilarity of belief and hope, and variety and differences. And this worldview totally changed the way we look at science, art, and literature. It states that only small arguments are suitable as a means to explain changes in society and politics. So, Lyotard emphasized that this is the driving force of postmodern science. He states that when the meta-discourse is abandoned, science no longer pursues the truth, but needs to find another evidence that justifies the research. Regarding this, he criticizes that the informational machine becomes superior. By distinguishing between knowledge and data, he states that if knowledge is to become useful, it must be transformed into computer data. A few years later, he published a book called The Inhuman in 1988, and here he explains about the worldview which is controlled by technology. Now, the second representative thinker of postmodernism is the French Jacques Derrida. Well, he was born originally in Algeria and he moved to France. Then he was very famous for developing the linguistic analysis of the unique word deconstruction. He throws a question. at the tradition of Western philosophy and furthermore to all of the families in Western culture. By throwing questions at the dominant theories and revising them, he promoted postmodernism. He argued furthermore that the tradition of Western philosophy was based on a very arbitrary dualism. In other words, sacred and profane, signifier, signified, mind and body are an example of this claim. He viewed that therefore even a simple text is suggestive of a hierarchy, and through such a system, the high class people are oppressing the low class people. Accordingly, he claims that deconstruction is the process of revealing this dualism. Now, let me move on to the third representative postmodernist, that is Michel Foucault of France. Again, by analyzing especially the relationship between power and intellect, he indicated how this is used by social organizations as a means to exercise control. So his basic thought was that truth is generated by power. And this regards that each society has a truth discourse of its kind. And this is only possible presupposing its relationship with the power forces of that society. Therefore, what we call advancement is only another form of control and regulation. Accordingly, he does not believe that a universal truth or justice exists. The fourth representative postmodern thinker is Jean Baudrillard, who argued, of course, he was a French, that the society is a hyper reality, meaning that the society is a manufactured place, just like Disney World. Likewise, it is not a coincidence that the important postmodern thinkers mostly came from France. As you see, this is, I think, because we have previously seen that after the Second World War, atheistic existentialist thinkers such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus mainly came from France. The developed form of their worldview may be regarded as postmodernism, and therefore we can say that this worldview firstly came from France as well. However, later this worldview spread to the United States and other nations. So the last scholar that we will see is the American thinker Richard Rorty. As a thinker who is most known for philosophically defending postmodernism, he claims that there is no divine perspective which shows the really real as it is. And this is because each individual interprets the world according to one's subjective conditions. However, Rorty does not state that the truth can be interpreted by all people in their own way. He emphasizes the social influence on personal beliefs. He views truth as only an intersubjective agreement between the members of the community. Now, how about the postmodernism in South Korea? Briefly, postmodernism, which is heavily influencing Europe and the United States, is also seen in Korean society. In terms of architecture, up until now, modernistic architecture was prevalent, of course, but recently, postmodern structures are being erected. Also, as the inflow of foreigners increase more and more, cross-cultural families are rapidly increasing. And furthermore, another example is that as pluralism is gaining attention, sexual minorities such as homosexuals are gaining power. Now, let me stop here, and next time we will talk about the strong and weak points of postmodernism. Thank you for your attention, and we will see you next time.